Ah, morning in the Paleolithic. No roosters crowing, no alarm clocks blaring, no 5 more minutes because, well, time didn't come with minutes yet. Cavemen didn't wake up to Google calendars or blinking LED lights. They woke up the natural way, with sunlight creeping through the cracks in the cave entrance, maybe a cold breeze nudging at their feet if someone forgot to pile the animal hides properly, or perhaps the smell of smoke if the fire from last night was still burning, which was either comforting or alarming depending on how close you were to it. Imagine it. You're curled up on a patch of furs that smells vaguely like wet dog and burnt pine, because that's what your bed is. You've got a few clan members snoring nearby. One is breathing loudly through his nose, another mumbles something about mammoths in his sleep, and someone's foot is resting a little too close to your head. You try to shift without disturbing anyone, but every bone in your body pops like gravel under a deer hoof. Stretching in the Stone Age was not yoga. It wasn't an elegant downward dog or a deep spiritual exhale. It was more of a half-groan, half-shiver, with a few stiff-necked grunts. Stretching was survival. You had to test all your limbs each morning to make sure they still worked. Fingers? Still there. Toes? Wiggle, wiggle. Spine? Sort of intact. Now, once you're up, and I use up loosely because cavemen didn't exactly spring out of bed with morning motivation, the first and most important task was very simple. Figure out if you were still alive, and if everything around you was safe. Check 1. Are you breathing? Check 2. Is your clan breathing? Check 3. Is that large animal-shaped lump at the cave entrance a sleeping dog or a sleeping bear? If all was well, you'd grunt to your nearest companion, not to say good morning, but more of a caveman's version of, "Are we okay?" If they grunted back, all good. If they didn't, well, time to poke them gently and hope for the best. Now, caveman mornings weren't dramatic. Contrary to what the movies want you to believe, no one sprang into spear fighting stances before breakfast. Most mornings were quiet, muffled, muted by fog and sleep and the soft crackle of leftover firewood trying not to go out. There was no coffee. That's tragic, I know. There was no black tea, no croissants, and absolutely no sourdough toast. What they did have, if they were lucky, was maybe a handful of nuts or some dried berries left from the day before, assuming the kids didn't eat them all in the middle of the night. If you had food, you shared it. No one hoarded granola bars in their mammoth hide blanket. Well, maybe Greg did, but Greg was always a little selfish about snacks. Now comes the bit that sounds dramatic but wasn't. Survival. We hear survival today and think of reality TV shows, harsh elements, wild predators. But to the average caveman, survival was mostly just remembering where they left their rock hammer and whether they had enough firewood to make it through the night. It was less about fighting wolves and more about not stepping in your own waste bucket, if you even had one. The morning routine was painfully practical. You check on the fire. If it had gone out, someone needed to reignite it, which wasn't as easy as flipping a switch or striking a match. You had to find the right stones, strike them just right, and hope someone had remembered to dry the moss the day before. No dry moss, no fire. No fire, cold breakfast. Or no breakfast? If the fire was going, maybe you'd reheat a bone stew which was less yum and more chewy. Think of it like caveman oatmeal. Bland, functional, and occasionally containing bits of bark that someone swore was for fibre. Now, before the clan scattered to hunt, gather, or zone out while staring into the forest, someone might assign loose roles for the day. Not with a clipboard or a whiteboard, of course, but with a few pointed grunts and vague gestures. You might be in charge of look out, a job that mostly involved sitting on a rock and pretending to spot danger while secretly napping with your eyes open. Or maybe you'd be sent to gather edible roots, which sounded simple until you realised half the plants in the wild were trying to poison you. Some folks stayed back, the elders, the injured, the ones too tired from last night's storytelling session, and occasionally the person who claimed they had hunter's shoulder, which suspiciously looked like they just didn't want to do anything today. Children, of course, were the wild cards. They were like little chaos engines running around, poking everything with sticks, getting tangled in vines, and asking for things that didn't exist yet, like, can we have more honeyberries? Or, why can't we ride the mammoths? Spoiler alert, you couldn't ride the mammoths, you could barely run from them. There was no morning rush hour, no commute, unless you counted the long awkward trudge to the berry bushes or the muddy trail to the riverbank where everyone awkwardly avoided eye contact during their morning bath, which was more like splashing water on your face and pretending that made you clean. To be clear, hygiene wasn't high on the priority list. Cavemen didn't floss. They didn't exfoliate. If you had a toothache, your best option was deal with it, or maybe chew on a root until you forgot about it. No dental plan, no eucalyptus facials, just grit and a surprisingly high pain tolerance. And while some folks took to the morning with energy, others not so much. The grumpy caveman was not a myth. There were definitely people who needed alone time before sunrise. You'd see them, sitting by themselves, near the cave entrance, staring into the fog with a look that said, "If anyone asks me to chase deer today, I'm going to move to a different valley." Some people were morning people. Others were just surviving. There's something oddly comforting about all this, despite the very real dangers of prehistoric life. Wild animals, unpredictable weather, the occasional landslide. Most mornings were just about managing discomfort and moving forward, putting one foot in front of the other. Grunting through the grogginess, tending to the basics. There was no Instagram to check, no emails to reply to, no podcast to catch up on, just birds chirping, wind rustling through tall grass, and the occasional distant howl that may or may not have been a wolf. Probably a wolf. You try not to think about it. And so the morning rolled on. Slowly, sleepily, nothing glamorous, just one of many mornings in a long, repetitive string of mornings where the goal was always the same. Stay alive, stay warm, maybe find something to eat, and try not to get stepped on by a moody elk. Eventually the morning would blur into the next part of the day, and that's a story for another time. But for now, as your own eyes start to feel heavy and your body sinks a little deeper into the comfort of your pillow, remember this: if cavemen could stretch, groan, stumble through their morning and survive, so can you. And they did it without caffeine. Sleep tight, time traveller. Hunting, gathering, and waiting. Once the cavemen had done their morning groans and stretches, squinted at the rising sun, and determined that nothing nearby was currently trying to eat them, they began what you could generously call the active part of the day. But active in this case doesn't mean high-speed chases or epic battles with mammoths every single Tuesday. No. Most of the time, life in the Stone Age was far less dramatic, and far more waiting around for things to happen. Let's start with the famous bit, hunting. Ah yes, cavemen and hunting. It's the classic image, isn't it? A gang of strong-jawed men with spears, running after a woolly mammoth through the snow, yelling things like, "Ha ha!" or possibly, "Greg, what are you doing? That's not a mammoth, that's a boulder." But the real version? Not quite so glamorous. Hunting was complicated. For one, it didn't happen every day. Hunting a large animal wasn't a casual daily task. It was a big deal, a sometimes multi-day affair, more like organising a group camping trip where one wrong move could get you trampled. And most of the day-to-day hunting, it wasn't about massive beasts. It was small game, rabbits, birds, lizards, if you were lucky. And catching them wasn't action-packed. It involved sitting and waiting a lot. Imagine this. You're crouched behind a bush. You haven't moved in 45 minutes. Your foot is asleep, your hand is cramping from gripping a tiny stone-tipped spear, and you're staring at a squirrel who seems to know exactly what you're trying to do and is being incredibly smug about it. It's not heroic, it's slightly embarrassing. Still, you keep still because movement scares prey, and this squirrel might feed you and 3 other people if you stretch it with some roots and the illusion of seasoning. So you wait, sometimes hours, and sometimes nothing. The squirrel scampers off, the birds fly away, the lizard darts into a crack in the rock, leaving only its tail behind, which is not ideal unless you're making lizard tail soup, which, as you might guess, doesn't taste like much.
Meanwhile, the gatherers are out doing their version of survival, which sounds nicer, but wasn't exactly a trip to the farmer's market. Gathering, unlike hunting, was daily, relentless, tedious. It involved knowing your plants, your seasons, your soil, and hoping that what looked like a tasty root wouldn't kill you in your sleep. There were no labels, no instructions, just guesswork, experience, and watching what the birds ate without dying. A handful of berries might take hours to find. You'd dig for tubers, kneel in the dirt, crawl through shrubs. Your knees were always muddy, your hands were always scratched, and then you'd discover that the patch you'd been working on was already picked clean yesterday by a different group. Great, sometimes gathering felt like a treasure hunt. Other times, it felt like losing a game you didn't even know you were playing. And then, of course, came the walking. Oh, the walking. Cavemen walked everywhere. Long, slow, exhausting treks. There were no horses, no carts. Just you, your feet, and maybe a heavy bag of roots strapped to your back with some woven vines that definitely didn't have great lumbar support. The terrain was not your friend. Rocky paths, slippery mud, hidden thorns. Sometimes a stream you had to awkwardly cross while pretending it wasn't freezing cold and ankle, deep in mystery slime. But here's the quiet truth of it all. Most of a caveman's day wasn't spent actually catching or finding things. It was spent waiting to catch or find things, that liminal space between the hope and the result. The limbo between maybe this is edible and, well, at least it didn't kill me. Some would call it boring, some would call it meditative. I like to think of it as prehistoric mindfulness, a gentle lesson in patience. Imagine it, sitting beneath a tree, squinting at a distant herd of deer, waiting for them to move just close enough. The wind rustles the leaves above you, a bug lands on your arm. You don't swat it, too risky to move. You just observe, exist, or crouching by a berry bush, turning each fruit over in your hand, checking the color, the texture, remembering which ones gave you a stomachache last time, listening to the birds argue overhead about some invisible territorial dispute. You're hungry, tired, maybe a little cold, but also present. There were no distractions, no multitasking. If you were hunting, you were just hunting. If you were gathering, you were just gathering. The only notifications were the distant snap of a twig or the sound of someone else tripping over a log and loudly cursing in grunts. And while you did these tasks, you thought about your clan, about that weird rock you found yesterday, about whether mammoths ever looked up at the stars and thought about you. Or maybe you didn't think at all. Maybe you just breathed, stared, waited. Sometimes you worked in silence. Other times, someone would hum, a tune that wasn't really a song, but more of a gentle repetition of sounds passed down through generations. Maybe someone told a joke, probably about Greg again. Why did Greg throw the spear backwards? Because Greg. It wasn't exactly stand-up comedy, but when your entertainment options were fire and shadows, even a bad joke was worth a laugh. Let's not forget that hunting and gathering weren't solo acts either. They were deeply social in the quietest, most communal way. You moved in small groups, covered each other, shared tips on edible mushrooms, watched the sky together, maybe argued over whose turn it was to carry the heavy root bag. And while you worked, you also passed along knowledge. Grandmothers whispering to daughters about how to tell real healing herbs from the fake ones. Uncles pointing to a cluster of hoofprints in the dirt, explaining how to tell if it was deer or boar. These little moments added up to survival, the original group chat but with more grunting and fewer emojis. Every so often, things did get exciting. A rabbit darting out of a bush, finally a chase, a hidden beehive, a risky shot at sweet, glorious honey, or, very occasionally, the moment when someone screamed bear, and everyone ran in 5 different directions while dropping absolutely everything. But these moments were rare. Most of the time, it was back to walking, watching, waiting. And once you'd found what you could, the bird caught, the tubers dug, the handful of greens stuffed into a pouch, you headed back. Slowly, tired, sore, the sun was lower now, your stomach louder, your arms heavier, Maybe you tripped on a root again. Maybe Greg did. It was probably Greg. The walk home was quieter, less hopeful, but not unhappy. You did your part. You brought something back. Maybe not a feast, but enough. And in that, there was something deeply grounding. You didn't need much to feel useful in the Stone Age. Just 2 hands, 2 feet, and the will to try again tomorrow. You see, cavemen didn't live in constant chaos. They lived in a rhythm, not a thrilling one, not a glamorous one, but a rhythm all the same. Wake, search, wait, find, walk, repeat. It was a kind of life that didn't need excitement to have meaning, where even a small win, 1 squirrel, 1 handful of roots, could feed a family and earn you a place around the fire. And so, as the day wound down and the fire started crackling again, the gatherers and the hunters returned. Someone proudly held up a skinny rabbit. Another showed off a weirdly shaped mushroom, already imagining it in the stew. A third was empty-handed, but no one judged. You'd try again tomorrow. The fire was ready, the pot was on. The night was approaching, and as they all sat, slowly chewing on whatever was found, they likely didn't complain, because even a little food was something. Even a small day was survival. Even all that waiting had brought them here, together, safe, if only for now. So, next time you're stuck waiting in line at the grocery store, tapping your foot, impatient at how long it's taking, just remember, your ancestors waited longer, for less, and they didn't even get a receipt. Stone tools and simple tasks. When we think of the Stone Age, one thing often steals the spotlight. Not the cave paintings, not the fireside tales, not even Greg and his inability to throw a spear straight. No, what really defines the era, what earned it its name, in fact, is the stone tool. Yes, the stone. The humble rock, chipped, cracked, and carried around like an ancient smartphone. Only instead of streaming videos, it helped you skin a deer, open a nutshell, or carve a hole in a piece of bone you hoped would one day be useful. Now don't get too excited. These tools weren't sleek. They didn't have ergonomic grips. They didn't come in multiple colors. If you wanted a tool, you had to make it yourself, or get someone in the group who was better at it, probably someone with thicker forearms and a suspicious number of scars. Making a stone tool wasn't something you did in a rush. It was careful, precise, and a little bit dangerous because flint chips like glass, and getting a shard in your thigh is not recommended in an age with no band-aids. Picture it, you're sitting on a flat rock, sunlight filtering through the trees, birds chirping above you, and in your lap, a chunk of flint. You pick up your hammerstone, another rock, smoother, rounder, with just the right heft, and start tapping. Tap, tap, crack. Little flakes fly off, sharp edges emerge. It's a rhythm, a pattern. Tap, crack, twist. It's quiet work, almost meditative, but also full of trial and error, because sometimes your knife ends up looking like a sad potato, and sometimes that sad potato becomes the tool that guts a fish. So you keep it anyway, because in the Stone Age everything might be useful. Once your tool was shaped roughly, you'd test it, maybe slice a bit of bark, maybe saw through a thin branch. Or if you were especially ambitious, try it on some dried meat. Was it sharp enough? Did it fit in your hand just right? Would it survive a solid whack on a mammoth bone? These tools weren't disposable. They were precious. If one broke, you didn't toss it in a landfill. You mourned it, reused the parts, sometimes reshaped it into something smaller, like a scraper or a boring tool for making holes in leather. Because once you had a stone tool, your job wasn't over. You used it constantly. There were hides to scrape. Lots and lots of hides. Skinning an animal was only step one. You couldn't just toss it over your shoulder and call it a day. No, if you wanted a fur cloak that didn't smell like old meat and decay, you had to work that hide for hours, sometimes days. You'd scrape off the fat, scrape off the sinew, then stretch the hide over a wooden frame and let it dry, like some ancient laundry project from the worst group assignment ever. And while you waited, You might chew on the edges, yes, chew with your teeth, to soften the leather. That's right, your ancestors were out here, tenderizing animal skins with their molars. So next time you grumble about modern chores, just be grateful your weekly to-do list doesn't include gnaw on elk flesh. And then there was cordage. Rope, twine, string, if you're feeling fancy. Cordage didn't just exist, it had to be made. From bark fibers, sinew, tough grasses. You'd split the fibers, twist them together by rolling them against your thigh over and over again, until it formed a long, sturdy line. Then you'd braid more of those lines together, and eventually you had something strong enough to tie a spear, build a trap, or suspend your food out of reach of rodents with tiny ambitions. Again, not thrilling, but useful, quiet, repetitive, almost relaxing. Then there were the baskets. Because how else were you going to carry 47 berries, 3 roots, and an angry toad you accidentally picked up by mistake? Basket weaving wasn't a quick skill. It required patience, an eye for symmetry, a willingness to restart every time a stick snapped in the wrong place. You needed to soak the reeds or grasses in water first to make them pliable, then weave them over, under, again and again, until a shape began to form. Sometimes it ended up being a bowl, sometimes it was a hat, sometimes it collapsed completely, and you pretended that's what you were going for. Trial, error, repeat, and all of this, these small tasks, these moments of creation, they weren't distractions from survival. They were survival. A tool that worked meant less wasted energy. A basket that held meant more food saved. A sharpened scraper meant warmer clothes, which meant surviving the winter instead of freezing to death, while muttering, "At least I died fashionably." And if you were especially skilled, others noticed. Maybe you became the go-to toolmaker. Maybe someone traded you a chunk of smoked meat for one of your perfect arrowheads. Maybe a child pointed at you and said, "I want to be like that one when I'm older." And everyone laughed, because that child still couldn't tell the difference between a fish and a rock. But admiration was real. Skills mattered. And these simple tasks, tool-making, scraping, weaving, they filled up the long hours when hunting wasn't happening. They gave purpose, structure, a rhythm. Someone would be repairing a spearhead, another patching up a fur tunic with bone needles, yet another squatting by the river, polishing stones not because they needed to be smooth, but because, well, it just felt nice. People carved, not just tools, but decorations. Someone somewhere decided that antlers looked better with a spiral pattern on them. Someone else spent 2 hours etching zigzags into a bit of bone. Art, boredom, spiritual expression. Maybe all three. There were days when nothing happened. No mammoth, no fish, just chores, but even that was a kind of peace. You could sit by the fire and repair your sling, mend a hole in your hide leggings, pass the time plucking feathers for arrows. Quiet, domestic labor that didn't make history books, but shaped history anyway. Because that's the thing they don't tell you about the Stone Age. Yes, it had danger. Yes, it had drama, but mostly it had hours, long, slow, thoughtful hours where simple hands did simple work. Work that needed no instruction manual, no screen, no power cord, just time, patience, and a few good stones. Work that hummed in the background of survival, that turned a sharp rock into a lifeline, that turned nothing into something. So next time you hold a fork, or lace up your boots, or open a drawer full of tools that all magically just exist, think of them sitting cross-legged on the dirt, stone in hand, task in mind, working not for fun or beauty or invention, but for warmth, for food, for life, and maybe, just maybe, for the quiet satisfaction of shaping the world. One flake of stone at a time. Now close your eyes and let that slow rhythm wrap around you. Tap, tap, crack, the gentle echo of your ancestors making something from nothing. And when you wake, perhaps you'll feel it too, the pull of the simple task, the weight of the quiet world, and the soft hum of history whispering, "You're doing just fine. Sleep well, toolmaker. rest, ritual, and random dancing. When the day's sun softened and began its slow descent toward the horizon, when the distant trees cast long sleepy shadows and the air grew cooler, a shift came over the ancient world. The movement slowed, the scurrying, scraping, and chasing tapered off. Those who had wandered far began their slow return. The hunters came back, tired and dusty. The gatherers returned with baskets on their backs, their legs sore and their hands scratched. And the firekeepers stirred the embers. It was time for something that is, in many ways, even older than language. It was time to rest. Rest in the Stone Age was not what you might picture. There were no beds, of course. No plush pillows or soft linens. Sleep was something you earned with effort and physical fatigue. But rest was more than sleep. Rest was gathering not just of things, but of people. The clan would sit together, maybe under a low rock overhang, maybe in a clearing, maybe near the slow river where the reeds whispered secrets to the wind. They'd sit on furs, on logs, or directly on the packed earth. And for just a moment, no one was moving. The tools were set aside. The weapons leaned against stones. The baskets were emptied, the day's work was done, and in that stillness a kind of quiet magic stirred. Someone stirred the cooking pot, and steam rose in lazy curls. Someone else added dried herbs found weeks ago and saved carefully for just such a night. And everyone breathed. You'd hear the crackling of the fire, the creak of old knees, a yawn, maybe the crunch of someone chewing roots very slowly and dramatically, just to annoy the person next to them. They didn't call it mindfulness back then, but it was a moment to simply exist, to sigh, to blink slowly, to feel the ache in your arms and the dirt under your fingernails and think, well, I'm still here. But humans even then couldn't sit still forever, and rest wasn't just about stopping. It was about remembering, and so the rituals began. Someone might begin to hum, just a low tone at first, more vibration than melody. Then another joined in, and another, until it grew not louder but fuller. A sound like wind through the trees, or water over stones. A song without words. Or maybe a song with words that didn't mean much anymore, passed down through generations. Syllables that rolled off the tongue like polished bones. Maybe a rhythm followed, the beat of a stick on a hollow log, the clap of hands, the percussive stomp of feet on the earth. Not fast, not loud, but steady. It wasn't a performance. No one was watching. It was just what people did. Some nights someone might dance, not a planned, choreographed thing, more like a sway, a shuffle, a tilt of the head and the lift of a foot. Dancing wasn't reserved for festivals or big occasions. Sometimes it happened simply because someone felt the warmth of the fire and the rhythm in their ribs and decided to move. And the others would watch not with applause but with knowing, because everyone had done it. Everyone had felt it, the need to move at the end of a day, not with purpose but with presence. Children would mimic. They'd bounce and twirl, arms flailing, giggling wildly, occasionally falling into the laps of elders who groaned theatrically and pulled them in for a hug. And there was laughter, not the modern, shrieking kind, but the gentle, rumbling kind. The laugh of people who had survived another day and found something funny in the mud or the mushrooms or Greg, who once again fell into the cooking pit because he wasn't looking where he was going. Greg, bless him, was probably a legend. But between the laughter, the dancing, and the singing, there was something deeper. Ritual, not in the modern, religious sense, but in the older, softer sense. A pattern. A familiar series of moments that made you feel like you belonged in the world. Someone would pass around a carved bone, a charm, a relic. Maybe it was from an ancestor. Maybe it had a story attached to it. No one knew if the story was real, but they told it anyway. See this scratch? That's from the tooth of the cave lion who chased old Rika into a tree. And this chip, that happened when she dropped it while running from bees. Everyone had heard the story before, many times, but they listened again, because stories, like stones, become smoother with time, more beautiful with age, and sometimes someone, often the oldest, would begin to speak not in stories, but in memories. About winters past, about a time when the river dried up, about the star that fell from the sky. The others would lean in. They didn't interrupt. These weren't lessons. These were gifts. Memories became instruction. Instructions became culture. Culture became identity. You knew who you were not because someone told you, but because someone showed you. With words, with rituals, with the sound of their voice in the firelight. Rituals were not always spoken. Some were in the way a fire was lit, or the way a fur was folded, or the way everyone, every night, turned their faces to the stars before sleep and murmured a quiet sound. Not a prayer, not exactly, but a kind of greeting. Like saying to the night, "We see you, let us rest," and rest they did. Eventually the laughter faded. The dancing stopped. The singing softened to a hum, then silence. The fire still cracked, but lower now. Embers glowing like sleepy eyes in the dark. People lay down in clusters close together for warmth. Children between parents. Elders wrapped in furs. Sometimes a dog curled up at their feet, dreaming dog dreams of chasing deer. The stars turned above them. There were no alarm clocks, no reminders, just the slow pulse of time, measured in stars and breaths. Sleep came slowly, gently, not in a rush, because the mind had been softened by rhythm and memory and laughter. The body had been tired by walking and working and dancing. The spirit had been soothed by story and song, and even the insects buzzing around lazily seemed to hum in tune. This was rest, not the kind you collapse into after burnout, but the kind you lean into with trust, because the clan was close. The fire was alive, the stars were watching, and tomorrow would come when it came. There was no hurry. Some nights a dreamer would wake before the others, stare at the fire, think about the big questions. Where does the sun go? What happens after breath? Why do we dance when we're happy? Why does Greg always drop things, but even those thoughts would drift, float away like smoke, and in that deep silence history was cradled. Not the history of kings or wars, but the true history, the heartbeat beneath it all, the rhythm of humans being together, eating together, moving together, remembering together, resting together, and it is here, in this gentle violet hush, that we find something very old and very familiar, because even now, even in your quiet room, with electric lights and thick blankets and modern worries, you still carry it, that ancient need to pause, to gather, to remember, to dance, even if only in your mind, and to rest. So let the fire fade, let the stars turn, let the rhythm of the ancient world fold around you like a fur blanket. You're safe, you're here, and tomorrow can wait. Sleep well, ritual, keeper, social circles and silent politics. Somewhere between the hunt and the fire, somewhere after the berries were gathered, and before the stars took their places in the night sky, there was something quieter and far more complicated, unfolding, because even in the world of stone and fire, of hides and hunger, people were not just surviving. They were navigating each other. You see, the Stone Age didn't come with a rulebook. There were no written laws, no signed treaties, no nameplates or titles. No one walked around saying, "I'm the vice president of Stick," gathering. But power, influence, those existed. Oh, they absolutely existed. Let's begin at the hearth. Not everyone sat in the same place. It may have seemed casual to the untrained eye people arranged in circles, passing around roasted roots or the thigh bone of something large and formally grumpy, but placement meant something. Who sat near the fire? Who sat just behind the one who always told stories? Who was closest to the best, tanned furs? These small details weren't always discussed, but everyone noticed them. There was a kind of invisible current flowing between glances and gestures. The one with the sharpest flint, respected. The one who once saved a child from a raging boar, admired. The one who never shared their dried berries, even in a drought, tolerated but quietly side-eyed. Silent politics wasn't about domination. It was about balance, because in a world where you depended on others for survival, Being too bossy got you ignored. Too selfish, and you found yourself walking alone the next morning. No help, no fire, just you and your bad decisions. So people learned the dance. A glance here, a shared scrap of meat there, a quiet agreement to go hunting together, not because you liked someone, but because you trusted that they wouldn't freeze mid-sprint when a bear appeared. Trust, you see, was the currency, and it wasn't just about who could throw a spear the furthest. It was who kept their word, who remembered who was allergic to that one weird mushroom, who didn't laugh when you fell in the river. Well, not too much anyway. Children watched all of this. They played nearby, yes, but they watched, mimicked, learned. If a respected elder shared a story, the children listened, not because they were told to, but because that elder's stories came with meaning. They made people nod, made people laugh, made people think, so the children leaned closer, their wide eyes reflecting the firelight, and slowly, without a classroom or chalkboard in sight, they absorbed the social map. That person, don't interrupt them. That one, they know which roots are poisonous. That one, they once stared down a wolf without blinking. Best not to challenge them in anything, not even pebble, toss. The most skilled members weren't always the loudest. Sometimes influence came quietly. Take, for example, the one who never raised their voice, but could settle arguments with a single glance. Or the one who didn't join the hunts, but whose hands could mend a broken spear better than anyone else. Or the one who remembered when the rains would come, just by watching the way the birds flew. Power was not always claimed. Often it was earned or grown like moss, soft, slow, and steady, but that didn't mean everything was peaceful. Disagreements happened. Of course they did. Someone took too much meat. Someone didn't return a knife. Someone kept singing off key during the rituals and refused to stop. And sometimes tension built, like pressure under stone. But instead of yelling or fighting outright, something else occurred. Gesture battles. One person might start refusing to sit next to another. Another might accidentally forget to share their acorn mash. Someone might whistle a tune that was suspiciously close to a mocking version of another person's family chant. This was prehistoric passive aggression. Eventually, someone, usually the peacemaker, or someone tired of watching people fight over who ate the last dried lizard, would step in. "Let's talk," they'd say, not with those words exactly, but with a nod, a shared piece of something sweet, a gesture toward the fire. And talking they would do, but not fast, not loudly. It wasn't about speed. It was about face. Saving. About finding a way to restore harmony without bruising the fragile web of respect and mutual need. You could disagree, sure, but not at the cost of the group, because isolation wasn't just sad, it was dangerous. There's no such thing as rugged individualism when wolves are sniffing around, and you only have 3 arrows. So people learned to smooth things over, to say sorry without saying it, to share a laugh, to offer the first bite of something fresh. These gestures were like apologies written in action. And sometimes politics took the form of alliances. You might share meat with someone regularly, not because you were best friends, but because you had each other's backs. You might vouch for someone, saying yes, they're a little odd, but they're the best at finding those weird purple berries. And suddenly, they had a seat closer to the fire again. Favor could rise and fall like smoke. Someone who was once admired might trip, literally or metaphorically. Maybe they made a bad decision on a hunt. Maybe they forgot a sacred date. Maybe they tried to take charge one too many times, and people started dying each other like, are we just going to let them do that? And just like that, the social tide shifted. But it was rarely cruel, because everyone deep down knew they'd mess up eventually too, and they hoped, when they did, that someone would speak gently to them. Offer them a root, remind them with a half smile and a quiet touch on the shoulder that they still belonged. At the center of this all were the elders, not always the oldest, but usually the wisest. The ones who remembered which winter the river froze too soon. The ones who knew where the sun would rise during the longest day. The ones who didn't need to speak often, because when they did, everyone listened. Elders weren't chosen, they became. They didn't issue commands, they told stories, shared dreams, hummed songs that hadn't been heard in years. And when people argued, they'd nod, wait, and then say something so simple and so true that both sides found themselves looking down at their feet in quiet agreement. But elders, too, had politics. They might disagree, might hold different memories, might smile a little too tightly at each other during feasts. Even wisdom has its rivalries, and over time small groups formed within the larger one. The fire builders. The hunters, the gatherers, the dreamers, the healers, the night watchers, each had their own inside jokes, their own little customs. But they weren't cliques, more like concentric circles on the surface of a still lake, separate but connected, always overlapping when someone joined from another group. Because migration and merging were common, the web shifted again. New people meant new skills, but also new dynamics. Would they share? Would they stay? Would they listen? Trust had to be rebuilt, shared again, bite by bite, task by task. A stranger might become a sibling. Or not. It all depended on the silent agreements made around the fire each night. Even love had politics. Whom you chose to partner with wasn't just about attraction. It was about alliances, about who could work together, who balanced each other, who made the group stronger, and jealousy. Oh yes, that existed too. Someone giving too much attention to someone else. A stolen glance, a shared laugh that lingered a little too long. It might not be spoken, but it was felt. And someone might start sharpening their bone tools with just a bit more force than usual. But again, it wasn't chaos. It was dance. The Stone Age wasn't just about survival. It was about subtlety, about learning the language of shoulders, of silences, of small offerings passed from one palm to another. And when the moon was high, and the fire was low, and the world quieted around them, those circles of people curled together under hides and stars, fell asleep knowing that tomorrow the dance would begin again, that they'd wake up and rebuild the web of relationships, that they'd share more than food, that they'd navigate the currents of feeling and fairness, that they'd lean on each other, not because they had to, but because that's what humans do. Even now, in our own time, with our own fireless fire pits and digital rituals, we still play the same social games, still glance sideways, still whisper alliances, still negotiate peace over coffee or emojis or quiet Sunday dinners. We still dance, and deep down you carry that memory, that quiet ancestral wisdom, that when the world is wide and wild, what keeps us alive is not just what we can gather, but who we gather with. Sleep now, quiet diplomat. Your people are near. The fire is warm, and tomorrow's circle is already waiting. Cave art, expression, and that one guy drawing bison again? Somewhere deep inside the cool, stone heart of a cave, just beyond the reach of natural light, just before the complete embrace of darkness, there is a flicker, a fire, a dim orange glow that dances on the walls like it remembers something you don't. And there, crouched low with ochre, stained fingers, and a handful of soot and spit and dreams, is a person. Maybe young, maybe not, but focused. Focused in a way that turns hours into seconds. Focused in the way only someone with no TikTok and no laundry and no notifications can be. They're drawing, not doodling, not passing time, but creating something on purpose. A bison, maybe, or a deer mid-leap, or a strange hybrid of man and beast with wide eyes and antlers, striding through the stone as if it knows something no one else does. And as the fire flickers, those drawings move, just slightly, just enough to feel like they might leap off the wall and join you by the fire. This wasn't decoration, this was expression, this was communication, this was art. Now you might think, but why? Why would someone in a world of hunger and cold and danger spend their time smearing minerals on walls? Because survival isn't just about food, or shelter, or safety. It's about meaning. It's about looking at the world and asking, what if this mattered? What if I could remember this? What if someone else could see what I saw even long after I'm gone? So they dipped their fingers in color. They crushed rocks into powder. They spat into their palms and mixed it with ash. They found sticks and reeds and brushes made from animal hair. They blew pigments through hollow bones like air brushes. They leaned close to the wall, so close their breath fogged it, and began to leave their mark. And oh, what marks they left! Herds of animals drawn in confident strokes, not stick figures, not guesses, but real, observed things. Muscles rippling, horns curving, eyes alert. These were not bored scribbles. These were love letters to the hunt, or perhaps to the hunted, or perhaps to the spirit of life itself, wild and beautiful and just out of reach. Some figures were repeated, over and over, bison, horses, mammoths, deer, as if one drawing wasn't enough, as if the memory needed to be layered, again and again, until the walls could sing it back in color and line. And then there was him, or her, the one who always drew bison. You know the type. Every time someone started a new panel, should we do a handprint pattern today? Maybe paint the sun like last time. There they were, raising a red, stained hand like actually, I was thinking another bison. And the others would groan, ugh, not again. But secretly they kind of liked it. Because the bison, Roar had something in their eyes, a fire, a vision. They didn't just draw bison, they channeled them. They studied them. They sketched in the dirt when no one was looking. They practiced antler curves on the back of their hand. They muttered about perspective and shading, and how the haunches of the bison should have more power, more movement. And somehow, despite the teasing, their bison did look alive. But cave art wasn't just about animals. Sometimes you'd see handprints, dozens of them, layered, stacked, overlapping, some tiny, some large, some blown in outline like ghostly signatures on the stone. It was as if they were saying, I was here. I am part of this. I matter. And they did. Every palm pressed against stone was a declaration of presence in a world that didn't promise tomorrow. A reminder that someone lived, breathed, created, loved, hoped. Sometimes the art turned symbolic. Shapes, spirals, grids, dots. We don't always know what they meant. Maybe maps, maybe rituals, maybe math. Maybe dreams, but they weren't random. You can feel it, the intention, the repetition, the care. Some scholars think these symbols were part of a proto-language, that they were part of a system older than writing, whispering across the millennia in shapes we haven't fully decoded yet. Others think maybe it was just someone trying to make sense of the world, which, if we're honest, is what all of us are doing. Even now, but back to that cave, that glowing room of flickering shadows. Sometimes more than one person painted. You'd have the confident one bison, Roar, leading the charge, and then a quieter one doing delicate details. Someone else might be good with color, grinding berries or minerals into vibrant pastes. Another might focus on the feet, only feet. No one knew why, but they were amazing at feet, and as the group worked, a rhythm formed, not unlike the rhythm of drumming or dancing. Brush, smear, whisper, laugh, silence. There was a kind of trance to it, a meditative flow, and it wasn't always solemn. Some drawings show animals with exaggerated features. One deer looks suspiciously smug. There's a boar with comically tiny legs. One wall has what appears to be, well, let's just say ancient humor has not evolved that much. They weren't just documenting. They were expressing and sometimes joking, because humans are humans. Even in 30-0 BC, someone was probably whispering jokes while painting antelope. But don't let the playfulness fool you. Some of these caves required effort to reach. Tight tunnels, vertical climbs, deep chambers, pitch black. You don't stumble into these places on a whim. You go there. You bring fire, you bring tools, you bring intention. Some think the act of painting itself was a kind of ritual, a ceremony, a way to speak to spirits, to ancestors, to the unknown. Imagine a small group deep in the cave, breathing slow, torches crackling, shadows stretching, every line drawn not just for art's sake, but to connect, to channel, to transform. In those quiet spaces, the line between human and spirit, between image and reality, between what is and what could be, blurred. And yet there's something oddly familiar in it all. You've probably doodled in the margins of a notebook, scribbled your name on a foggy window, left a handprint in wet sand, taken a photo of your lunch not because it's important, but because you want to remember, because you want to say, I saw this mattered, this was beautiful, so did they saw the curve of a horn, the arc of a leap, the way the wind moved through grass, the sorrow of a dying creature, the triumph of a hunt. And they wanted to remember, they wanted to show someone, maybe their child, maybe their clan, maybe a spirit, maybe us, somewhere in those layers of pigment and scratch marks and handprints. They were saying, please don't forget this, don't forget me. And we haven't. Not really, because thousands of years later, we still gasp when we see the horses of Chauvet, still stare into the eyes of painted lions, still trace the ridges of ancient handprints with our own fingertips, almost matching palm to palm across time. That's not history, that's connection, that's the pulse beneath all things. So as you drift now, eyes growing heavier, breath slowing, warmth wrapping around you like a fur cloak, know this, you are part of a lineage of dreamers, of artists, of people who needed to do more than survive, people who made meaning out of dust, who told stories with color, who painted the walls of the world so the silence wouldn't feel so vast. Sleep now in your own cave of blankets and walls and quiet. Sleep like the bison, painter, soot on your hands, fire on your mind. The art is done, the marks are made, and tomorrow someone might find them. Rest, rituals, and the rhythm of existence. After the embers dimmed and the shadows stopped dancing on the cave walls, there was stillness. Not silence, exactly, there were always sounds. The distant murmur of wind curling into the cave mouth, a low cough from someone's fur bundle, the crackle of fire nibbling at its last breath of dry wood, but still stillness, a shared, ancient exhale. The long pause after a day's work was done, and there was no more running, no more gathering, no more making. Just the sound of people being together in the quiet rhythm of rest. You might imagine our cave, dwelling ancestors as endlessly moving, hunting, building, escaping predators, avoiding bad mushrooms. But they rested. Oh, they absolutely rested, not just from exhaustion, but with intention. Rest wasn't wasted time. It was part of the rhythm. Their days had no clocks, no alarm bells or reminders or blinking red lights, but their bodies knew. The earth knew, the sun arced overhead and told the story. The moon pulled softly at the tides of their inner lives. And in that story was a rhythm, a breath, and within that rhythm was a rest. After dusk, when things quieted, that's when rituals began. Simple ones, soft ones. Someone stirring ashes gently so sparks wouldn't fly too far. Another folding and refolding a hide not for warmth, but out of habit. Repetition. The kind of act that says, I'm safe now. I can let go. Children curled into laps or into the crook of someone's side. Partners shifting close, eyes half closed, and then someone would start humming, low, wordless bone, deep humming. Not a song to perform, not a chant for drama, just a sound that felt like the inside of a chest, like comfort, like something that vibrated in your sternum and said, you're not alone. This was ritual, not in the grand, ceremonial sense, but in the everyday magic of repetition, the little things they did, over and over, because it made them feel whole, because it tied them to one another, because it helped the world make sense after a day that maybe didn't. Rituals shaped rest. They helped signal, now is not for fighting, not for running, not even for thinking too hard. Now is for being. Sometimes someone would tell a story. A quiet one, a myth passed down so many times the edges had softened. The one about the bird who stole fire, or the woman who turned into a bear, or the giant whose feet made valleys and whose tears filled rivers. The story didn't need to make sense. That wasn't the point. The point was the telling, the rise and fall of voice. The way people's heads turned slightly, just enough to catch the tale. The way even the baby, not yet old enough to walk, would go still, eyes blinking slowly, caught in the rhythm of someone else's words. And when the story ended, not with a bang but with a whisper, there'd be a pause, and then maybe the fire pop. And then nothing, just quiet, just breathing, just fur shifting and dreams beginning. Sleep came in layers. Not like our modern 8-hour blocks, not always all at once. Some would sleep early, others later. Someone would stir in the night and add a stick to the fire. Another might watch the stars through the cave mouth, whispering to the sky as if it were an old friend. Some took turns keeping watch, not out of fear, but out of love. Someone had to make sure the children didn't roll too close to the edge. Someone had to listen for the sounds that didn't belong. Someone had to hold the space so others could rest. It wasn't burden, it was honor. The watchers learned the sounds of sleep, the soft whistle of nostrils, the twitch of dreams, the half-murmured words that made no sense but were said with deep conviction. A child muttering, "Stick bird no," with such intensity that you couldn't help but smile and wonder what the bird had done. Some watchers hummed to themselves. Others stared at the fire as if it might answer something they hadn't even asked yet. One or two might slip away to look at the moon, really look, and think about how far away it was, and whether anyone else anywhere was looking too. And when they grew tired, they'd pass the duty to another, with a soft nudge and a nod. No words needed. Just the rhythm continuing. Not all rituals were nighttime, some were morning. When the sky just began to glow, someone, usually the lightest sleeper, would stir. Maybe they'd stretch, maybe they'd grunt, maybe they'd yawn so wide it startled a dog-like creature curled at their feet. And then they'd tend to the fire, coax it back to life, feed it gently, the way you'd feed a sick animal or a grumpy elder. With respect, with patience, others would follow, slowly, grumbling, scratching, wrapping hides around their shoulders like reluctant ghosts. Someone would sneeze, someone else would fart. That was always funny. Even in 1200 BCE, a well-timed fart was comedy gold. Then came water, then food, then the start of the day. But even then, especially then, rituals shaped the rhythm. A piece of food always shared with the elder first. A certain hand gesture made before stepping outside. A soft kiss pressed to a child's forehead always the same number of times. These rituals weren't laws. They weren't imposed, they were chosen, passed down not because they had to be, but because they worked. Because they created something bigger than one person, something circular, something that felt like home. There were larger rituals, of course, seasonal ones, birth, death, mating, migration. These came with symbols, with songs, with colors and markings and words you only said once a year, if ever. The kinds of rituals that made people cry, or laugh, or dance. But the small rituals, those were the heartbeat. Washing your hands in the stream before eating. Laying one particular rock near your head at night, because your grandmother said it kept bad dreams away. Saying "go softly" to someone before a hunt, not because you were superstitious, but because you loved them. And sleep was part of all this. It wasn't failure, it wasn't laziness, it was sacred. You didn't fall asleep. You entered it like walking into a pool you knew well. You didn't dream because you had time, you dreamed because your soul needed space. Because the world was too big to hold in waking hours. Because dreams were how you talked to those who weren't there anymore. or never were, or might be someday, rest, ritual, rhythm, the 3 R's of prehistoric existence, never written, but etched into every moment. And somehow, through all the change they've survived, you still rest. You still have rituals. You still follow rhythms even when you fight them. You hum without realizing it. You fold your blanket a certain way. You say good night the same way every night, even if it's just a glance toward your phone or a kiss on the cat's head. Your rituals are quieter, softer, digitized sometimes, but they're there and sleep. You still crave it. Still chase it, still treasure it, still fear its absence, because somewhere inside you remember. You remember the cave, the fire, the gentle song, the soft tap of bone on stone, the feel of fur against your cheek, the sound of someone breathing near you, just enough to remind you that you're not alone. You don't need to go back to the cave. You're already there. Every night, when the world dims and your thoughts slow, and your rituals begin the brushing of teeth, the last scroll, the final sigh, you are stepping back into that rhythm. You are part of a lineage that rested, that honored the quiet, that believed in their deepest hearts that sleep was not a weakness, but a gift. So sleep now, let your shoulders fall, let your jaw go slack, let your thoughts soften like river stones. You've earned this rest, not because you finished everything, but because you're alive, and that is enough. The fire is low, the rhythm continues, and you are exactly where you need to be. Tools, ingenuity, and that one guy who invented the rock hammer. The rock was just lying there. Not remarkable, not shiny, not carved or balanced or anything, just a rock. But someone picked it up. They turned it over, felt its edges, tapped it against another stone, listened to the sound it made, just a soft clink. And then, for reasons no one can explain, they hit it again. Harder this time, and the edge split, not randomly, not uselessly, but sharply, and that was the beginning. It wasn't just a rock anymore. It was a tool. No one called it that, of course. No one said, "Ah yes, behold, my multifunctional, ergonomically designed blade." But someone, somewhere, picked up that jagged-edged stone and thought, this could cut meat, or bark, or sinew, or maybe even bone. And that was the moment when the world got interesting. Because once you start using a rock for more than just existing well, then you start thinking differently. You start noticing differently. You start changing things. Soon, other rocks join the party. Flat rocks for pounding, long rocks for digging, heavy rocks for smashing, curved ones for scraping, even round ones thrown with a bit too much enthusiasm, usually by someone who insisted they were really good at aiming, and always missed. And then came sticks, glorious, versatile sticks. One person tied a rock to a stick and said, "Now I don't have to be right next to the thing I'm trying to hit." And everyone nodded, very impressed. Another added a sharper rock and thought, "Now it's a spear." Another tied twine and feathers and made a dot. Someone else figured out that a bent stick with string could fling things really far. And thus, the bow and arrow was born, along with the ancient equivalent of, "Do not shoot that in the cave." And just like that, tools weren't just things you made. They became extensions of the body. Your arm got longer. Your bite got sharper. Your reach got farther. The world got smaller. But let's go back to that first person, the one who picked up the rock. Let's call him Talk, just for fun. Talk wasn't special, necessarily. He didn't have a beard of wisdom or glowing eyes. He probably had a runny nose and a bad knee. But Talk was curious. He noticed things other people didn't, like the way certain stones broke more cleanly, or how some left a white powder on your fingers. He liked the feel of obsidian. He liked the sound of flint when it clicked against bone. Talk experimented. He didn't call it experimenting, of course. He called it messing around, trying things, seeing what happens. Sometimes, oops. He'd sit away from the others, chipping at stones while everyone else was building fires or drying meat. And people rolled their eyes. There goes Talk again with his rocks. Maybe try helping once in a while, Talk. What are you even doing? That's just dust now. Talk, you chipped a hole in my sleeping rock again. But every so often, talk made something useful. A scraper that made hide smoother, a blade that cut faster, a pointed tip that stuck in a mammoth just a little longer. And people noticed. They started asking, "Hey, could you make me one of those?" They started trading extra berries for his tools. They started respecting him just a little, which, of course, made talk insufferable. He started naming his tools. This one's bitey, this one's sharp face, this one is called the Destructor. Everyone pretended not to roll their eyes, but secretly they loved it, because tools weren't just functional anymore. They were personal, they held stories. This was the axe I used in the big hunt. This blade skinned the hide we slept in all winter. This scraper belonged to my grandmother. Tools became heirlooms. And with time, tools got better, more refined, more efficient. People learned how to shape the stone intentionally, not just by luck. They discovered heat could make it easier, that water could soften certain materials, that bones used just right could carve not just shapes but patterns. Because once tools existed, art followed, scratched onto handles, etched into antler, dotted onto clay. A hammer wasn't just a hammer anymore. It was a canvas, a signature, a message. This is mine. I made this. I am part of this world. And it wasn't just rocks and sticks. Let's talk about needles. Someone, perhaps a woman, perhaps a child, perhaps someone sitting quietly on the edge of camp, looked at a sliver of bone and thought, what if this had a hole in it? Then they threaded sinew through that hole, used it to pull hide through hide. Sewing was born. Clothes weren't just draped anymore. They were made, they fit, they protected. Needles might not seem exciting, but they changed everything. You could live in colder climates. You could fix what tore. You could carry things more easily. And who do we thank? The one who sat there poking tiny holes into bone, over and over, until the first needle was ready. Let's call her Honor. Honor the patient, honor the brilliant, honor the one who muttered, "No one ever helps me with these furs," and created the future. Honor was the unsung engineer of comfort, and as tools evolved, so did teaching. You couldn't just hand someone a rock and say, "Good luck." You had to show them how to hold it, where to strike, which angle mattered, which stones to use, what to avoid, and most importantly, what not to do. So tool-making became one of the earliest forms of education. Not formal, not with a blackboard, but with hands-on learning. Here you try. No, like this. Watch me. Try again. Generations passed down knowledge through muscle memory, through demonstration, through hours spent sitting side by side, chipping stone into purpose. That was engineering. That was culture. That was the beginning of apprenticeship. And where there's teaching, there's tinkering. Once the basics were passed down, people got creative. One clan figured out how to haft a blade better, with resin and twine. Another found that certain woods bent without snapping. One genius said, "What if we shaped the end of this spear so it whistles when thrown?" Suddenly, it wasn't just survival. It was innovation, trial and error, version 1, version 2, version 73, improvements, disasters, occasional injuries. Someone got poked in the foot. Someone else got whacked in the head. But they kept trying, because making tools gave them power, not power over others, power over the unknown, power to cut, dig, climb, defend, carry, build, and express. And let's not forget the multipurpose tool, the Swiss Army knife of the Stone Age, maybe a hammer on one side and a scraper on the other, maybe a digging point that also stirred soup, maybe a rock that crushed seeds and, on bad days, crushed egos. People loved their multi-tools, and if they didn't have one, they pretended they did. They'd walk around like, "Oh yeah, this thing, it's a chopper / scooper / honor stick." Honor stick. What did that even mean? No one knew, but it sounded impressive. There were tool makers who specialized, tool hoarders who had too many, tool traders who always had something shiny, tools snobs who said things like, "Ugh, you're still using flint? That's so last solstice." Tools became more than tools. They were status, they were identity, they were connection, And even now they're with us, when you hold a pen, a spatula, a phone, a brush, a screwdriver. You're not just using an object, you're channeling talk. And Anna, and the unknown thousands who sat in the dirt and thought, I bet I could make this better. So as you drift off now, warm and still, let your hands go soft. Let your breath slow. Know that the tools are resting too. The blade is clean. The handle is smooth. The work is done for today. And maybe in your dreams you'll sit by the fire with Talk and Anna, holding your own creation, something sharp, something beautiful, something yours. Because the spirit of ingenuity never sleeps. It just dreams. Nighttime in the cave. Dreams, stories, and snoring mammoths. The fire crackled, low and steady, casting flickering amber shadows against the uneven walls of the cave. The air was smoky, thick with the scent of charred wood and cooked marrow. Outside, night had folded over the world like a heavy, fur-lined cloak, swallowing the landscape in a muffled quiet. Only the occasional grunt from a distant bear or the whistling wind sneaking through cracks in the stone reminded them there was still a world beyond the circle of warmth. Inside, it was finally time to settle. The children were yawning, their little fingers still sticky with honey or berries or whatever passed for dessert, when most of your diet consisted of root tubers and dried meat. One child curled up next to a furred leg, likely belonging to a parent, or maybe just a kindly neighbor. Another snuggled a lump of animal hide, as if it were a favorite stuffed mammoth. The adults weren't quite ready for sleep. Not yet, because even thousands of years ago, bedtime was a process. First, you had to rearrange the sleeping furs. Someone always complained theirs were too damp. Someone else said theirs smelled like wet goat. And someone always tried to claim the warmest spot by the fire, even if they hadn't done anything all day except fall into a creek. After the arguing, the grumbling, and the last minute adjustment of cave rocks that were definitely not pillows, there came the moment that was perhaps the most magical of the day. The moment of telling. No one would have called it a story circle. No one would have called it storytelling. But that's what it was. Someone, usually the oldest, or at least the most long-winded, would begin. Did I ever tell you about the time I saw the sky fall? And just like that, everyone leaned in, eyes heavy, but minds wide awake. Sometimes the stories were about real things, hunting mishaps, near-death experiences. That one time Ogre got chased by a bird and screamed like a squirrel. Other times they were not so real. They were about spirits in the stars, beasts that lived inside trees, a great turtle that carried the world on its back, a cave that whispered your name if you walked past it on the coldest night of the year. Stories didn't need to be true. They needed to be felt. And more importantly, they needed to be remembered. There were no books, no journals, no maps, no calendars. Memory was everything. So stories became more than entertainment. They were education, they were warning, they were comfort. A story told at night could help a child avoid danger the next day. A tale of a clever hunter could teach strategy better than any lecture. A tragic tale could prepare someone for the mysteries of grief. And a funny story, those were the best of all, could melt the weight of a long, hard day and tuck you in with a smile. Some storytellers had a rhythm, a lilt, a way of pulling listeners along like a raft down a slow, winding river. Others liked drama, pausing just before the important part, dragging out the suspense until even the snoozers opened one eye. And then there were those who exaggerated. It was the biggest lion I've ever seen, easily the size of 5 mammoths stacked on top of each other. Didn't you say 3 mammoths last time? SHH, you weren't there. Everyone knew the story changed a little each time, and no one minded. That was part of the fun. Watching the legend grow legs. Watching an ordinary encounter with a sleepy lizard turn into the night of the fire dragon who spoke my name. And what about dreams? Well, eventually, The stories wound down. The fire sank into coals. The cave shifted into silence, broken only by the sound of gentle breathing and snoring. Oh, the snoring! It started soft, like a bear humming underwater. Then came the high, pitched whistle, usually from someone with a particularly creative nose. Next the rattler, the sleeper whose entire body vibrated with every breath, as though a thunderstorm had taken residence inside their ribcage. And finally the duet, two people, asleep on opposite sides of the cave, snoring in perfect counterpoint. There were no earplugs in the Stone Age, only fur to press into your ears and the futile hope that exhaustion would beat volume. Still, sleep came, and with it, dreams. We don't know exactly what cavemen dreamed. There are no fossilized thought bubbles. But we can guess, because the brain hasn't changed that much. So perhaps they dreamed of things they feared. Being chased by wolves, falling from cliffs, being lost in the dark forest with no fire and no way back. Or perhaps they dreamed of things they longed for, a field full of slow, fat animals that didn't run, a river that gave fish just by looking at it, a tree that dropped cooked meat instead of fruit, and maybe, just maybe, they dreamed of things they couldn't explain, flying, speaking to the dead, turning into animals, meeting beings that lived in the stars. Some dreams were shared. Upon waking, someone would whisper, "I saw my grandmother last night. She told me to listen to the wind today." And no one laughed. They nodded quietly because dreams had meaning, not just the meaning of what you ate or how tired you were, but deeper. Dreams were messages from the spirits, from nature, from memory itself. There were dreamers in every group, people who always had strange visions, who always said, "I saw it before it happened." Were they shamans, mystics, or just really, really good at guessing? It didn't matter, because their dreams were part of the group's understanding, a shared library of possible futures. And when someone dreamed of fire raining from the sky, or of mammoths walking backward, the others listened. But dreams weren't always heavy. Some were silly, like dreaming you caught a squirrel, and it scolded you in perfect human speech, or that your feet turned into fish, or that you forgot how to walk and had to roll everywhere. Everyone had one of those dreams now and then, and in the morning, when someone mentioned it, others would laugh and nod and say, "Yes, I've had that one." Because dreaming was another kind of storytelling, and sometimes the line between story and dream was so thin, you couldn't tell which side of sleep you were on. Nighttime in the cave wasn't all peace and stories, of course. There were fussy sleepers, the ones who rolled and kicked and occasionally punched the air mid-dream. There were early wakers who always got up before dawn, stepped on someone's foot, and tried to stoke the fire too loudly. There were fire guardians, assigned to keep the flame alive through the night. A sacred job, a boring one, a cold one. Many of them fell asleep, and many a cave story began with, "Remember when the fire went out and we all nearly froze? Thanks, Dogo. Poor Dogo." But the night had its magic too, the soft whisper of the wind through the cave mouth, the way the embers glowed like sleepy stars, the way a child curled against their parent with total trust, the way even the grumpiest hunter softened in his sleep. The cave was not just stone, it was shelter, it was memory, it was home. Every groove on its walls had heard laughter, every crack had heard whispers, every corner had seen eyes close and dreams begin, and above all, nighttime was the glue that held the group together. Because when the light faded and the animals settled, and the air cooled to silence, what mattered most wasn't the hunt or the tools or the danger beyond the hills. What mattered was togetherness. They were warm, they were fed, they had stories in their heads and dreams on the way. And tomorrow they would rise again just as the sun peeked in through the cave mouth, gold and new, promising another day of walking, hunting, gathering, wondering, and maybe, just maybe, another story. But for now there was only sleep, steady breathing, the occasional snort, and the quiet hum of a people resting at the edge of time. Good night, talk, Good night, Anna. Good night, all the ones who dreamed before us. We carry your stories still. Why, cavemen were probably funnier than us. It's tempting to imagine our ancient ancestors as serious, stone-faced beings, mud, streaked, hunched by the fire, always staring thoughtfully into the middle distance like they just remembered. They forgot to invent agriculture. We picture solemn expressions, eyes always scanning the horizon for danger, hands too busy with sharp rocks and dead animals to make even a single joke. But that's probably nonsense, because if there's one thing humans have always been good at besides walking on two legs and setting things on fire, it's being funny. Not funny in the carefully scripted, stand-up comedy special sort of way. No, funny in the universal human way. The slipping on, mud burping, during, important ceremony laughing, so hard, you drop your spear kind of way. Let's start with the most ancient of all human arts, the prank. Imagine, if you will, a young member of the tribe, let's call him Grug, sneaking up behind his older brother and gently placing a freshly plucked lizard tail on the back of his fur wrap. Not a dangerous prank, just slightly creepy. Now imagine the brother discovering this hours later with a sudden yelp during a very solemn mammoth tracking meeting. Everyone stops, looks, sees the tail still twitching slightly. Cue the laughter. Now, did they have words for gotcha? Maybe not, but they had expressions, body language, that universal moment of shared hilarity when someone else is caught off guard. Grug might have doubled over laughing, and someone else would have laughed harder just watching Grug laugh. And just like that, a good old-fashioned prehistoric prank was born. Humor, after all, is often born from the unexpected. And nothing's more unexpected than finding a frog in your sleeping furs, or watching someone trip over their own club, or realizing mid-hunt that you've been talking to a log for 5 minutes because you thought it was your cousin from behind. Physical comedy was likely a big hit around the cave, especially because it didn't require language. You didn't need a punchline. You just needed to watch a man try to swat a buzzing insect and fall into a patch of stinging nettle, or witness someone accidentally invent slapstick by hitting themselves with their own sling. Of course, some people were known for being the jokers of the group, the ones who could make animal noises so convincing that the entire hunting party ran for cover thinking a dire wolf was nearby, the ones who mimicked others behind their backs, hunched posture, flailing arms until everyone was weeping with laughter and pretending not to look. And yes, impersonations were probably a thing, because even without modern impressions of celebrities or politicians, every group has someone who walks a little funny, or talks a little slow, or always says the same thing. These quirks are comedy gold, and where there is gold, there is a Grug ready to strike. Even the elders had their share of jests, the dry, slow, deadpan delivery. The old timers probably leaned into their wisdom role only to interrupt a serious story with an unexpected twist. And then the sky spirit descended from the clouds and said, "Who took my loincloth?" Cue respectful snorts of laughter. Laughter was social glue in a world filled with real danger. Predators, cold, starvation. It was laughter that reminded people they were still alive, still human, still able to find joy in the absurdity of daily life. Think about the games they must have played. Wrestling matches where someone inevitably got tickled. Stone, throwing contests that devolved into giggle fits. Impromptu dancing that started as ritual and ended in ridiculousness. Picture a group trying to invent music. Someone beats a rhythm on a hollow log. Someone else claps along. A third tries to whistle through a reed and accidentally spits a beetle into the fire. They all burst into laughter. And what about language humor? Even as early speech developed, puns and wordplay likely weren't far behind. A badly timed grunt, a mispronounced name, a funny sounding new word someone invented just to describe a strange bug on their leg. Language mistakes were likely hilarious. Did you just call the fire wet stick? Well, it sort of looks like want. Some early words were probably meant to be funny. Onomatopoeic grunts mimicking animal sounds, rhythmic nonsense chants, words that became inside jokes passed down through generations until no one remembered what they originally meant. And don't forget toilet humor. Yes, even then, farts were funny in 0 BC, probably even funnier then. Because imagine, you've just spent 12 hours dragging a dead bison uphill. You're sore, tired, hungry. Everyone's gathered in silence around the fire. Then suddenly PPPPPR, someone breaks the quiet with an unfortunate burst of bodily truth. A pause, a few chuckles, then the entire group collapses into helpless, exhausted laughter. It wasn't crude. It was necessary. It was cathartic. Humor was also a form of rebellion, mocking a rival clan by imitating how they throw spears, making up funny names for their leader, creating secret jokes only your group understood, passed around like currency. Humor built bonds and boundaries. Even in conflict, humor helped. Perhaps two hunters argued about who really spotted the deer first. Voices rose, tempers flared, but then someone, probably that same grug, said something ridiculous. Yes, but did the deer see you first and pity you for your ugly face? Pause. Laughter, conflict, diffused, that instinct-breaking tension with a joke, is ancient and deeply human. Some humor was visual, even artistic. Little carvings etched into rocks that looked suspiciously like exaggerated body parts. Someone scratching a silly face into the wall behind the cave leader's favorite rock seat. Who did this? The leader asks deadpan. Silence, then laughter. Was it graffiti? Was it satire? Either way, it meant someone took the time, with a sharp tool and limited light, to create a punchline in stone. That's commitment to the bit. And where there was romance, there was flirting. And where there was flirting, there was funny flirting. A certain glance, a silly walk to get attention, a joke about one's own bad hunting luck just to get a smile. Even then, humor was courtship. A well-timed joke could win affection faster than a well-placed spear. Love and laughter have always been inextricably linked. Even among children, humor thrived. They mocked their elders with innocent impressions, played silly games like, who can keep a straight face the longest while making weird noises. They poked each other, hid behind rocks, ran in circles. They laughed constantly, because children don't need much to be funny. They are funny, and when adults joined in, just for a minute, they remembered what it was like to see the world as a game again. Even tragedy found its relief in humor, the kind of quiet, tender laughter that follows loss. Someone telling a story about a loved one who once fell in the river chasing a duck. Everyone cries, then laughs, then cries again. Humor didn't erase grief, but it softened its edges. At night, around the fire, even as the stories turned serious or mystical, there was room for laughter. Someone would interrupt a tense tale with a snide aside. A dog might snore unexpectedly. Someone's stomach might rumble loudly during a moment of silence. And always, always someone would laugh, even if just under their breath, because laughter wasn't just allowed. It was essential. It reminded everyone that, for all the struggles and storms, they were still human. They still found joy in the strange and silly. They still had time for mischief, still had the urge to tease, to poke, to grin. And in that way, perhaps they were funnier than us, because they didn't need social media or sketch comedy or perfectly timed TikToks. They had the real stuff, the mud's splattered, tooth-grinned fire, warmed kind of humor that lives in the bones. So maybe the next time we laugh at something ridiculously simple, a cat falling off a table, a friend tripping over a shoe, a child calling spaghetti noodle snakes, we're connecting with something ancient, a deep, unbroken thread of silliness that stretches back tens of thousands of years. To the very first grug who ever pointed at a rock, gave it a ridiculous name, and made someone laugh so hard they dropped their dried beetle snack. Humor is not an invention. It is an instinct. And somewhere, deep in the layers of time, in a cave filled with laughter and smoke, a caveman once rolled on the ground, gasping for air, because someone else pretended to talk like a goat. And that might be the truest history of all. What did cavemen dream about? Long before beds had mattresses, before books and lullabies, before alarm clocks and electric lights, there were dreams. Dreams wrapped in furs, dreams beneath stars, dreams nestled between cold stone and a fire that never quite stayed lit through the night. Somewhere in a quiet cave a man named perhaps Og, or maybe not, drifted into slumber, the flickering fire painting shadows across his brow. And as his breathing slowed, his mind wandered into the misty wilderness of dreams. But what did he dream about? Not taxes, not emails, not job interviews or social media anxiety. He probably didn't dream of spreadsheets, or traffic, or forgetting someone's birthday. So what filled the sleeping mind of a Paleolithic human? Maybe he dreamed of running, not away, not toward anything in particular, just running free and wild across open plains that stretched out forever. No thorns, no aching feet, no cold wind, just the sensation of moving, of being light and fast and untouchable. Like a deer or a bird or a memory that can't be held, or perhaps he dreamed of food, but not just any food, perfect food. Mammoth steak that cooked itself, honeycombs the size of your head, dripping endlessly into outstretched hands. Giant berries that never turned sour. Warm, fragrant roots that sang a little song as you bit into them, promising strength and safety. Maybe, just maybe, the dream offered a feast where no one had to hunt, where no one ever went hungry, and even the wolves waited patiently at the table. Some nights he might have dreamed of flying, not with wings, not exactly, but soaring, over treetops, over rivers, up the side of mountains, dreams where the rules of gravity forgot to apply, and the world lay beneath him, small and slow and simple. Maybe he looked down and saw the smoke from his own fire. Maybe he saw other fires, little clusters of warmth across the land, each one glowing with the breath of other dreamers. And maybe he felt less alone. Sometimes his dreams may have been filled with the faces of the dead. His father, who once taught him to throw a spear, his sister, who fell ill during the cold moons, his grandmother, who used to hum strange tunes while grinding roots with her toothless grin. They appeared not in fear, not to haunt, but simply to be remembered. They sat beside him in the dream, said things without words. They made gestures, showed him scenes. Sometimes they vanished mid-sentence, as dreams so often do. And yet, when he woke, he might have remembered just enough to feel comforted, or maybe unsettled, and maybe he didn't dream in pictures at all. Maybe it was sounds, the rhythmic echo of hooves, the crackle of fire, the laugh of a child. Some nights he might have dreamed of impossible things. A giant rabbit that sang, a tree that gave birth to stars, a waterfall that whispered secrets in a forgotten tongue, and sometimes terrifying things visited, a panther the size of the moon, teeth in the sky, his own hands turning into branches, running through the forest with no legs, falling into the earth until it swallowed him whole. Not every dream was gentle. Some were loud, some were wet and cold, some pressed down on his chest like a great invisible boulder. In the darkness, the brain weaves strange shapes, shapes that sometimes made him sit bolt upright, gasping, eyes wide, heart pounding, eyes darting to the mouth of the cave, listening for a sound that might not exist. And when the fire flickered just right, he might have thought he saw something from the dream still waiting there. So he turned over, pulled the fur tighter, waited until the edges of dream and waking blurred again, and the rhythm of his breath returned. Sometimes the dream world was kinder than the waking world. In dreams, no one missed the spear throw. The hunt always ended in triumph. The wounds healed instantly. The blizzards passed in seconds, and the ones you missed most came back for one more sunrise. Other times dreams were confusing. They didn't follow the rules. They introduced strangers who wore familiar faces. They moved him through seasons in a blink. Sometimes he became someone else entirely. A bird, a fish, a bear, a fire. Dreams didn't always make sense, but perhaps that's why they mattered. Back then, before there were therapists or bedtime apps, dreams were the closest thing to explanation. What else could make sense of fear, of joy, of longing? What else could help someone understand why their chest ached when looking at the moon? Maybe they even told stories of their dreams, sat together in the early light, chewing roots, sharing fragments. I was in a cave, someone might say, but it was in the sky. I was chasing something, another might add, but when I caught it, it turned into smoke. And perhaps the others nodded, not because they understood, but because they felt it too. Maybe these dreams became myths. Maybe 1,000 dreams formed the first gods. A creature with wings of stone, a lake that talks, a woman made of clouds. Maybe someone dreamed of the world's beginning, or its end. Maybe the first stories weren't invented, but remembered from dreams. And over time, certain dreams were repeated. Maybe a hunter dreamed of a white mammoth. Then someone else did. Then a third. And soon, that mammoth wasn't just a dream. It was an omen. A symbol, a sign, and so the dream became real. Because when enough people dream the same dream, it begins to shape the waking world. Even children must have dreamed, perhaps of being giants, or discovering hidden caves filled with glowing insects, or finding a stone that could sing. They woke up and tried to draw it on the wall with charcoal, the memory already fading. But they tried anyway. Some of the strange cave paintings we marvel at today, spirals, handprints, animal men, they may have come from dreams. Not real animals, not real people, not real anything, just visions born in the dark behind closed eyes. Because the mind, when free of light and language, paints its own truths, and in the absence of clocks, deadlines, and glowing rectangles, sleep itself was sacred. The tribe likely rose and rested with the sun, but in the deep winter, when the nights stretched longer than waking hours, dreams may have become the main event, a world richer than anything they could walk through, a place where the impossible felt normal, where time flowed like water and memory bent like tree limbs. And when they told those dreams, others listened, because dreams were never just dreams, they were warnings. Gifts, messages from beyond. Sometimes they even changed decisions. I dreamed the hunt would go badly, someone might say. And maybe the leader paused. Maybe they waited another day. And maybe, just maybe, that changed everything. So even without written language, the dreams persisted. They became whispers, songs, paintings, fire stories. They lived on in the collective memory of the tribe, passed from sleeper to sleeper. Some dreams might have been shared across generations. A woman dreamed of standing on a mountain, arms stretched wide. Her granddaughter dreamed the same. Then her great-grandson, and though none of them could explain why, they knew it meant something, so they told the story again and again until it became part of who they were. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we still dream. Somewhere deep in our minds, past the to-do lists and the advertising jingles and the random snippets of sitcom dialogue, is a cave. A quiet, flickering cave filled with soft shadows, and in that cave a fire burns. A fire built by a dreaming ancestor who once closed their eyes and imagined something impossible. And we, too, sit near that fire, night after night, and we listen, and we dream. What cavemen knew that we forgot? There is something quietly astonishing about the fact that for most of human history, no one had a phone, a clock, a mirror, or even the concept of Wednesday. And yet, somehow, our ancestors survived. Not only that they thrived enough to lead to you, here, now. So the question arises, what did they know, these so-called cavemen? What did they understand about life that we, in all our electrified brilliance, have somehow misplaced? They knew the stars, for one, not like we do today, not as decoration for mugs or as metaphors in song lyrics, but as tools, as guides, as old friends. They knew which ones rose with the frost and which dipped low with the harvest. They didn't need apps to track the moon's phases. They simply watched. Night after night, generation after generation, until the sky became a map so familiar they could navigate across open plains with no signs, no roads, just constellations etched in memory. They looked up and they remembered. They also knew silence, not awkward silence, not the kind filled with anxiety or the urge to fill it with words, but real silence, the kind that hums in the bones, the kind that lets you hear a deer's hoof crack a twig 100 feet away, the kind of silence that made room for your thoughts and your fears and your dreams without interruption. They sat beside fires, not just for warmth, but for stillness, the flames crackling softly. No screens, no music, just the quiet murmur of breath and wind, and in that silence they didn't feel lonely. They felt present. We've forgotten that kind of quiet. They knew how to read the earth. Not just the sky, not just the seasons, but the dirt beneath their feet. They could look at a footprint and tell you who it belonged to, how fast they were moving, how long ago they passed. They noticed the way moss grew, which rocks held heat, how the birds flew when a storm was coming. This wasn't knowledge you could cram for. It wasn't written down or spoken aloud. It was absorbed slowly by living close to the land. 1,000 little observations stacked over time. The kind of knowing you don't even realize you have until you need it. They didn't go on hikes. They didn't camp. They didn't need nature documentaries. Their entire world was in nature. And it wasn't something to conquer. It was something to listen to, something to respect. We've built cities and closed the windows. They knew patience when the hunt failed, when the rains came late, when the child didn't walk until their 3rd year. There was no overnight shipping, no instant results. They understood that life moved in cycles, not timelines. They waited because waiting wasn't failure. It was part of the rhythm. They didn't rush a fire. They didn't panic when nothing grew for a while. They knew some things took time, sometimes generations. They understood that slow didn't mean broken. It just meant real. They knew pain, not the metaphorical kind, the real kind, bone, deep. They knew what it meant to lose a tooth and not get it back. To break a leg and hope the body figured it out. To say goodbye to someone and never see them again, not because of distance, but because death was always near. But they also knew resilience, not the kind that gets tweeted or put on posters, the kind that just was. You got up, you kept going, because you had no other choice, because life was hard, but beautiful, and grief wasn't hidden. It was painted, sung, danced, shared around the fire. They didn't ask, "Are you okay?" In hushed tones, they knew you weren't okay, and they sat with you anyway. That was enough. They knew the power of the group, not in theory, but in daily survival. One person couldn't do it all. Couldn't hunt, gather, cook, care for children, mend clothes, and keep watch through the night. It took everyone. It took trust. It took sharing. They didn't use the word community. They lived it. If one person ate, everyone ate. If one person was sick, the others cared for them. If someone was born, the entire group celebrated. If someone died, the group mourned. They didn't ask, "How are you?" They already knew, because they saw you every day. Knew your face, knew your habits, knew when you were hurting just by how you sat near the fire. They also knew play. Not scheduled play, not performance, not competition, just joy, the joy of leaping into a river, of balancing on a log, of throwing a stick as far as you could just to see where it landed. They played with each other, with children, with animals, with shadows. Play was not a distraction. It was a way of learning, a way of bonding, a way of being human. They didn't grow out of it. They just changed how they played. We've convinced ourselves that maturity means seriousness. They knew better. They knew how to tell stories, not with plot arcs and 3-act structures, necessarily, but with rhythm, with memory, with meaning. They told stories of the hunt, of the spirits, of the ancestors. They told them with gestures, with smoke, with bone flutes and painted walls. They knew that a good story didn't need to be true, to be important. They told stories to teach, to comfort, to explain what the world hadn't yet made clear, and they listened. Not for the twist ending, not for the punchline, but for the connection. They knew how to listen, really listen. Without interrupting, without waiting for their turn to talk, without checking a wristwatch or thinking about their next appointment. They listened like their life depended on it, because often it did. They knew love not as an idea, not as a genre of entertainment, but as a practice. They knew what it meant to carry a child through cold months, to build shelter for someone who couldn't walk, to share food even when you had almost none left. They knew how to braid affection into tasks, to hold hands without ceremony, to sit close when the fire was low. They didn't say, "I love you," 1,000 times. They showed it in fur wrapped around shoulders, in water fetched, in berries shared. And they knew how to be alone, too. Not as punishment, but as a gift, a moment in the woods, a walk to the river, a quiet breath before sleep. Solitude wasn't scary. It was part of the cycle, part of being a whole person. They didn't call it self-care. They just knew when to step away for a while. They knew their bodies, not from books, not from TikTok, but from living in them. They knew what it felt like to stretch after a day of walking, to squat while cooking, to rest when tired. They didn't push past every signal. They listened. Pain meant something. So did pleasure. So did the feeling of the sun on skin after a long winter. They didn't have body image issues. They had bodies that worked or didn't. But either way, they paid attention. They knew death not abstractly, not as a concept, but as something present, something real, something that arrived early and often and without reason. And because of that, they cherished life more deeply. Every sunrise mattered. Every meal was a miracle. Every healthy child a blessing. They didn't pretend death could be avoided, but they did what they could to delay it. And when it came, they honored it. They buried their dead with care, with tools, with flowers, with rituals, because they knew death was not the end of memory, and perhaps not the end of everything. They knew mystery, not just as a problem to be solved, but as a fact to be respected. They didn't know why lightning struck, why the seasons changed, why dreams made you cry, and they didn't rush to fill the gaps. They let mystery live beside them. They gave it names, spirits, animals, ancestors. They welcomed it. We forgot that somewhere along the way. We turned mystery into discomfort. They knew how to sit in awe, to watch a sunset in silence, to marvel at an eclipse, to feel small in the best possible way. They didn't need to document it. They didn't need to understand every angle. They just watched and breathed and let it be. They knew how to be here, not in the past, not in the next task, but in this moment. Whether it was hunting, gathering, cooking, resting, dancing, grieving, loving, they were in it. Because they had to be, because presence wasn't a choice. It was survival. They didn't multitask. They lived each task fully, and maybe that's what we forgot most of all, that being human isn't a race. It's not a performance. It's not a checklist. It's a rhythm, a breath, a fire that glows quietly, warming those who sit beside it. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by noise, by speed, by pressure to do or be or know more, pause, close your eyes, picture a quiet cave, a fire, a few figures sitting close, breathing, existing, knowing things we've forgotten. And maybe, if you listen closely, you'll remember too. Not everything, just enough, to feel a little more human. Again, the long nap, how prehistoric people slept. They didn't have mattresses, or blackout curtains, or white noise machines playing ocean waves on a loop. And yet, somehow prehistoric people slept. They slept without memory foam, without bedtime podcasts, without lavender sprays or cooling pillow inserts. They laid down wherever they were, sometimes on furs, sometimes on bare earth, and they drifted off into the same unknown that greets us every night. But their sleep, it was different. It was shaped by the dark, the cold, the fire, and the rhythms of the world around them. When night fell in the prehistoric world, it fell completely. There were no glowing clocks, no distant headlights, no hum of electricity bleeding softly into your ears. Night was dark, the kind of dark that made even the trees seem to disappear. The kind of dark where you could hear your own heartbeat and the breath of the person beside you. And little else. And in that stillness came sleep. Not the kind of sleep we've built our modern lives around, but a more natural rhythm. A slower unfolding of rest. Sleep wasn't one long, solid block. Instead, it came in phases, what some anthropologists call segmented sleep. They would drift off soon after nightfall, often huddled together for warmth and safety. This first sleep might last 3 or 4 hours. Then, gently, almost without realizing it, they would wake in the middle of the night. But this wasn't insomnia. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't a problem. It was normal. They would stretch, sip water, tend the fire. Some might get up to relieve themselves. Others would sit quietly, looking up at the stars, maybe whispering stories to each other. Some couples, it's thought, used this time for intimacy. Others would pray or simply breathe. This wakeful interlude lasted an hour or two. Then, as naturally as they woke, they would drift into their second sleep. Another long, slow descent into dreams. This pattern, first sleep, midnight wakefulness, second sleep, was once as natural to us as blinking. And perhaps it still lives in us, in those moments when you wake at 2 a.m., for no reason, stare into the quiet dark and wonder what to do next. Maybe your body remembers they didn't worry about 8 full hours. They didn't track REM cycles. They didn't scold themselves for waking in the night. They just listened, slept when tired, woke when ready, trusted the rhythm of body and night. They often slept together. Not just couples, entire groups. A pile of bodies, like wolves in a den, curled into one another for warmth and protection. Children nestled between adults. Elders at the edges, their lighter sleep making them early warning systems. A communal sleep. It's possible that in larger groups there was always someone awake, always someone watching the fire, listening to the night, alert for danger. This created a kind of rolling security, allowing others to sleep more deeply. A human version of flock behavior. Safety in numbers, shared responsibility. They didn't sleep alone in rooms with closed doors. The cave, the hut, the lean-to it was all one space. One rhythm, one shared breath, and the fire always the fire. It wasn't just warmth, it was comfort. A flickering light in the dark. A defense against predators. A friend, crackling softly, reminding them they were safe. People would tend it through the night, feeding it logs, coaxing it to stay alive. They probably watched the flames the way we watch our phones, hypnotized, comforted, pulled into a quiet trance. And yes, they dreamed. We don't know the details, we can't. But we know they dreamed because dreaming is part of being human. As long as we've slept, we've dreamed. And we know, too, that they cared about their dreams. Because in ancient burial sites, in the patterns on stone, in the stories passed down through oral tradition, there are whispers of another world. A world reached only in sleep. A world of spirits and animals and ancestors. Dreams weren't meaningless. They were messages, visions, warnings, wisdom from something older and deeper than language. They remembered them. They told them, they shared them. A child might wake up, eyes wide, and speak of a bear that danced on 2 legs. An elder might nod and say, "Yes, I've seen that bear too. Tell me how it danced." They didn't dismiss dreams. They listened. The caves too tell us things. In places like Chauvet and Lascaux, deep in the earth, there are paintings, ancient, breathtaking paintings, of animals' hands, symbols. No light reaches there naturally. To enter, you need fire. You need purpose. Some scholars believe these were dream places. Not homes, not shelters, but sacred spaces where waking and sleeping blurred. where people might go not just to paint but to dream. Maybe they slept there. Maybe they took journeys within, lit by flickering torchlight and the images of bison and lions. Maybe dreams came more vividly in the deep dark, surrounded by rock and silence. Their sleep was not isolated from their lives. It wasn't a break from meaning, it was meaning. They didn't compartmentalize rest. It was woven into everything. They napped too. Yes, even in hard prehistoric life, there was time for naps. During the day, after a big meal, beneath the shade of a tree. Elders resting while children played. Mothers nursing quietly as their eyes fluttered closed. A stolen moment of peace beneath the open sky. There was no shame in rest, no guilt. It was survival, and they slept differently by season. In summer, when days were long, sleep might come late and end early. In winter, when darkness ruled, sleep might stretch out into 14 hours, broken and soft, folded around the cold. They followed the sun, not the alarm clock and the sounds of their sleep. The real lullabies were different too. No cars, no hum of the fridge, no ticking clocks, just the wind through branches, the distant call of a night bird, the rustle of fur, the crackle of the fire, the slow, even breathing of those you loved nearby, maybe an occasional snore, a shifting limb, a sleepy murmur, but mostly peace. There was no bedtime routine in the modern sense. No brushing teeth, no scrolling, no last emails, just the slow surrender, the fire dying down, the body cooling, the mind softening like clay. They didn't count sheep. They lived among them. They didn't read to fall asleep. But perhaps an elder told a story, or hummed a tune, or whispered something about the stars above. They slept in circles, not in rows. They didn't need to optimize a sleep. They just let it happen. There's something primal, something deeply right about their sleep. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs, not engineered, not commodified, just natural. When they awoke, there was no alarm, just the light shifting, the birds calling, the smell of ash and dew. No snooze button, just stretching, yawning, rising slowly. The day beginning as the night ended. And maybe, just maybe, sleep meant more to them than we'll ever fully understand. Because they didn't treat it like a nuisance. They treated it like life, like a door to another world. And maybe they were right. So tonight, when you lie down, think of the cave, the firelight flickering on stone, the soft breathing of others, the darkness pressing gently outside, and let yourself slip, slowly, back into something older than time. Something we never really lost, sleep. And so, as the fire in your mind burns lower, and the shadows of ancient caves fade into the quiet hush of your own room, maybe you'll find yourself drifting, just as they did. With no rush, no pressure, no timeline, just the soft rhythm of breath and the steady beat of a heart that's been human for thousands of years. Tonight you sleep not just as yourself, but as part of a lineage, a quiet echo in the long lullaby of history. Thank you for resting with me. This has been boring history for sleep, where the past is peaceful, the stories are slow, and sleep always wins in the end. I'll be here next time. Good night.